Late at night, the streets of Barnaul seemed quiet, almost peaceful. It was a city where people knew each other, where neighbors exchanged greetings, and where families believed that evil belonged to faraway places. But behind this illusion of safety, in the shadows of this Siberian town, someone was watching, waiting, hunting. He was not a stranger in a mask, not a monstrous figure easy to recognize. He was someone who blended into everyday life, someone no one suspected. This is the story of the Barnaul Maniac, Alexander Anisimov, a man who turned an ordinary city into a stage for horror. Alexander Anisimov was born and raised in Barnaul, a city in the Altai region of Siberia. His childhood seemed ordinary, nothing that stood out as particularly strange to those around him. He attended school, played with other children, and grew up in a working-class neighborhood like countless others. But inside him, a storm was forming, a dark need for control and violence that no one could see. He looked like everyone else, and that was his greatest weapon. The 1990s were a time of chaos in Russia. The collapse of the Soviet Union had left cities struggling. Factories closed, crime rose, and people tried to survive in a world that no longer offered stability. Police forces were underfunded, untrained, and overwhelmed by the wave of crime that followed the fall of the USSR. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty and desperation that Anisimov found the perfect hunting ground, a city where fear was already present and where one more disappearance would not immediately spark suspicion. His first known crimes were almost invisible. A young woman would vanish on her way home. Friends would whisper that maybe she had run away to another city, chasing a better life. Families grieved quietly, not always able to demand answers from the authorities. But then another disappeared, and another, until whispers turned into warnings. Something was happening in Barnaul. Someone was preying on women. Anisimov's method was chilling in its simplicity. He approached his victims calmly, often pretending to offer help or to act like a friend. In some cases he would drive by in his car, appearing trustworthy, a man who seemed safe enough to accept a ride from. In other moments he would corner his victims, using force when necessary. Once he had them under his control, the mask fell away, and the true predator revealed himself. The attacks were brutal, often leaving signs of rage, but at the same time carried out with a coldness that suggested careful thought. He was not acting in a frenzy. He was deliberate, methodical, and terrifyingly calm. The people of Barnaul began to live in fear. Parents told their daughters never to walk alone. Women avoided empty streets and quiet alleys. Rumors spread like fire. There was a man out there, someone who looked like anyone else, but who would strike without warning. The city's sense of safety cracked, and the community grew tense. For years, the identity of this predator remained a mystery, and every unsolved disappearance added to the terror. What made Anisimov so dangerous was his invisibility. He was not a recluse, not an outcast, not someone people would point to as suspicious. He blended into daily life seamlessly. He worked, he greeted neighbors, he walked the same streets as everyone else. Nobody could imagine that behind his calm eyes and ordinary face lived a man who saw human life as disposable. That disguise of normality allowed him to continue for years, always just beyond the reach of suspicion. Police tried to investigate, but the 1990s were unforgiving to law enforcement. Technology was limited, and resources were scarce. Files were lost, evidence mishandled, and many cases were left unresolved. Witness descriptions were vague, and victims often disappeared without anyone having seen the final moment. The fear grew, but so did the frustration. People wanted answers, but the authorities struggled to deliver them. It was as if Barnaul itself had been cursed, trapped under the shadow of an invisible predator. As time passed, Anisimov grew bolder. Each crime fed the darkness inside him, and the thrill of control and power became addictive. Survivors later recalled how he spoke with an unsettling calmness, as if he was detached from what was happening, as if the violence was just another task to complete. That composure, that chilling lack of emotion, made him unlike most criminals. He was not losing control, he was in complete control, and that was far more terrifying. The city's fear deepened with each body discovered. People began to believe they were living alongside a ghost, someone impossible to catch. But Anisimov was not a ghost. He was flesh and blood, and like every predator, he would eventually make mistakes. The seeds of his downfall were beginning to form, even if it would take years before investigators could finally piece the puzzle together. As the years passed, Alexander Anisimov's crimes continued to cast a long shadow over Barnaul. The city grew used to whispers about the maniac, a faceless figure who could strike at any time. Fear had become a part of daily life, woven into the fabric of the community. Women no longer trusted strangers, and men were suspected simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Still, the predator remained free, feeding on the silence and fear he created. But no matter how careful a killer is, mistakes will always surface. The first cracks appeared when investigators began to see patterns. The times, the locations, the methods, they were not random. The same hand was guiding the violence. The same shadow lingered over each crime scene. With the arrival of new forensic techniques, especially DNA analysis, Russian investigators were finally able to link cases that had previously seemed isolated. Slowly, the outline of the Barnaul Maniac began to emerge. Anisimov had lived for years believing he was invisible. He had blended in so well that even neighbors and colleagues could not imagine his double life. But investigators were closing in. Witnesses began to describe a man who matched his appearance. DNA evidence, though still limited, began to connect him with scenes of brutality. Each thread pulled the mask away until the ordinary man and the hidden monster could no longer be separated. When police finally confronted him, they expected denial, resistance, excuses. But what they found instead was chilling calm. Anisimov confessed with a strange detachment, as if speaking about events that had happened to someone else. He described the crimes with detail, recalling the fear in the eyes of his victims, the control he held over them, and the satisfaction that drove him to kill again and again. To the investigators, it was like listening to a man recount his daily routine, not atrocities that had destroyed dozens of lives. The number of murders shocked even the most hardened detectives. Dozens were confirmed, but whispers suggested that the real total was far higher. Some said 50, others said 100. The truth may never be known. What was certain was that Barnaul had lived for years under the shadow of one of Russia's most prolific killers, a man who had hidden in plain sight, smiling to his neighbors, while carrying the darkest secrets imaginable. The trial brought the city's pain into the open. Families of victims came forward, demanding answers, demanding justice. They listened as the details were laid out, how their daughters, wives, and sisters had been deceived, trapped, and murdered. The horror of those nights replayed in the courtroom, and for many, the wounds could never heal.